So there are cars that demand your attention, whilst there are others that try and earn your respect. Now, the Aston Martin DB7 has been around now for over 30 years, and for much of that time is forgotten and maligned, and very much living in the shadows of the rest of the Aston Martin family. Either it's too Jaguar for the Aston enthusiasts, or it's too expensive for the Jaguar purists. And it's the kind of car that everybody's got an opinion about. It's either too old or it's not old enough. Now, despite the fact that lots of people have got an opinion on the Aston Martin DB7, not that many people have actually owned one. And I do, because this is my Aston Martin DB7. And I want to share my ownership journey with you, but also to let you know that I've kind of fallen head over heels for this car, and I want to see if I can tempt you into at least changing your opinion on the Aston Martin DB7. So let's have a look around. Even after cars like the Aston Martin Vanquish, or of course the Jaguar F-Type, I think this is one of Ian Callum's most best designs. I mean, just look at the proportions, timeless, that impossibly long bonnet, and of course that rear short deck hugged by those delightful haunches at the back. I mean, the lines are perfect, the proportions are great, and I can't find a bad angle of this car, not one. It's not a car that shouts because it doesn't need to. It's almost like turning up to a dinner party in a finely tailored tuxedo when everybody else turns up in neon trainers. I think for me, this car just gets better and better with age. So inside the engine bay is as glorious as beautiful as the rest of the car. What you're looking at here is an inline six supercharged engine delivering 335 brake horsepower. Now, given that was in the mid-90s, that was seriously quick and powerful, and this was mated to that ETA 90 supercharger. So yes, looking absolutely glorious. Now that is, don't say it too loud, an AJ6 engine from Jaguar. However, it was heavily revised and bears little resemblance to other AJ6 engines elsewhere in the Jaguar family, but it absolutely looks swell in that engine bay. So for me, the Aston Martin DB7 is very much like that eccentric uncle that I'm sure many of us recognise. He's always well dressed out, wearing tweed, immaculate, always in time, never in a rush, witty, charming, full of stories, and of course drinks his whiskey out of crystal glass. Yet for some reason he's not admired, or he's not really seen part of the family. And the Aston Martin DB7 for me is very much like that. Well, it isn't a real Aston, is it? It's cheap, or it's a jag in drag. And having owned one, I actually think, you know, that's absolutely not the case. But actually, this is the car that saved Aston Martin. It took revival to survival. It was the car that if we didn't have, of course we wouldn't have the Vantage or the Vanquish, or indeed the DB9. And that design language that we see in the DB7 exists to this very day. So I'm going to try and convince those naysayers out there that this is a real Aston, and it's definitely something that we should hold in high regard, and at least invite him to the wedding whenever they do come round. So, ever since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I have been petrol mad. Even growing up in the 80s and 90s, just drawing about cars, reading about cars, and in dreaming having cars was a big part of my life. And I've always had an affection for anything British. And I guess Aston Martin was a car that I've always kind of promised myself, but clearly a bit of a pipe dream. And when I saw the DB7 in the 90s, I was like, wow, I don't think I've quite seen a car with such sheer beauty and beautiful proportions. And I guess I've always wanted one. And I guess the opportunity came around for me to own this car about 18 months ago. And I basically, I went for it, and I've not been disappointed. Look, the car isn't perfect, it's far from, but then again, what car, high-end luxury car from the mid-90s, which happens to be hand-built, ever is? There has to be a degree of compromise when you're building cars on a bit of a budget. But actually, it's the charm, it's the quirkiness, it's that eccentricity, which I think is a fabulous characteristic to have, even in people, is what makes me very attracted to this car. And when you get your head around some of those quirks and those foibles, it really does give you the ability to make what is quite an emotional, yet sometimes expensive connection to a car. So how did the Aston Martin DB7 come about? Well, again, like many things, quite a protracted story. Jaguar were very much looking to replace the XJS, but in many ways it was more of a spiritual successor to the E-Type, and they were creating a nice coupe-based car in the early 80s to mid-80s. I think it was Project XX, but I'll have to put the correct description in the video here. That was quickly shelved by Jaguar, given the fact they couldn't afford to have another failure, given the XJ220 didn't go as planned. They were being honest about it. And so Aston Martin, looking to make a quick buck or move into, relatively speaking, high volume car production, took on the stalled project alongside TWR Racing, and then with the young Ian Callum set about designing a modern Aston Martin using design cues from both the DB4 and DB6. And as we say, the rest is now history. And what we got was this beautifully styled Aston Martin car that left everybody aghast at the Geneva Motor Show in 1993. And Aston Martin went on to sell 7,000 of these cars. Up to 99 it was the i6 supercharged, and then replaced by the V12 from a 99 to about 2004. Now, there's a lot of criticism about Aston Martin, a lot of later criticism, in particular some of the switchgear and its use of part bin components out of the Ford empire, with the smashing of Mazda and whatever, Mazda and Citroen. But actually, okay, we'll come on to that shortly, but actually, you look at Astons back in the 70s and 80s, and it was just as bad. You look at the Aston Martin V8 that had Citroen SM wing mirrors, and it had, I'm sure it had Hillman Hunter rear tail lights. So, and even in the 80s, you had the Virage with the Scirocco rear tail lights. So this is very much a characteristic of Aston Martins, and it shouldn't be the determining factor when considering whether this is a real Aston or not. Okay, so vegans, look away now. I am pretty sure Aston Martin bought every cow north of the Adrian's Wall to kit out the inside of these cars. There is leather absolutely everywhere, from the doors to the seats to the dashboard, all around the cabin. And I'm pretty sure that the air is upholstered in this car. They've even got that lovely suede headliner, if it's still intact, and that lovely burr walnut dash. And it really is a opulent place to be, and definitely gives it a sense of occasion. And it's one of the things I really love about this car. You do feel special. Definitely the kind of car you would use for a very special day out. But let's broach the elephants in the room. Yes, that Ford switchgear. There is plenty of Ford switchgear dotted around the dashboard, and yes, arguably when you're spending £80,000 on a car in the early 90s, you'd expect something a bit more, but that really was where Ford were at the time, and if it meant you could save this wonderful brand, then it's a price worth paying in my book. And actually, 5 minutes into that car, when you're smelling that opulence and feeling rather comfy as you're being wafted about in this gentleman's club on wheels, albeit I don't profess to be a gentleman, at least all of the time, then actually you forget about that switchgear. I guess the one thing I struggle to reconcile is this Mazda MX-5 door handle. It really does look out of place, and I guess if there's one thing I'd change in that car, that would be the first thing to go. But that still doesn't reduce my affection and love for this car. It's just one of those quirks that you do hopefully at some point come to live with and hopefully love one day. So when I bought this car, I wasn't sure what to expect. I guess I kind of thinking that given the fact that it is dated technology, and to an extent has been rehashed of previous cars, notably the XJS, I thought perhaps the steering wheel would be a bit vague, a bit ponderous, and the performance would be, I guess, quite sedate. And while some of those things are true, I was pleasantly surprised. The performance in terms of that supercharger really makes the drive quite exhilarating, and the handling, actually, it's pretty competent. You set yourself up and give it the beans and point the car in the right direction, it will politely agree and point you wherever you want to go. And I was very surprised by that. Now, let's be real, however, if you think you're going to throw this into a corner thinking you're driving a Lotus Elise, then you will be a little bit disappointed. the car is going to politely say, look, remember you're driving a dinner jacket and not a pair of Nike Air Max. I think the thing you'll remember is that this car is a ballroom dancer. It isn't a street dancer. And if you think about a ballroom dancer, you go with the flow. A ballroom dancer doesn't waste energy on moves it doesn't need to do. But if you follow it through, you find yourself struggling to keep up. And that's very much what this car is all about. It's poised, it's dignified, it's polite, and it kind of goes round bends with dignity rather than enthusiasm. Okay, the best bit about this car, without question, when you park the lovely opulent interior and of course the gorgeous Ian Callan looks, is that supercharger mated to that inline-six engine. It really is the party piece, and it's intoxicating. So for vast swathes of time, you can drive around this car in a very sedate and comforting way and just take in the lovely lanes and the admiring glances. However, if you start to lift those revs and get the car into that torque band, the car becomes a different animal altogether, and you start to hear that whine of the supercharger, very much like that Vulcan bomber whine that I'm sure many of you know, and it takes the driving experience to another level. So let's just give that a go now. Put the foot down, here we go, kicking in there, and the torque is pushing me back in my seat, changing to fourth, and it keeps going, it keeps going, it keeps going, and before you know it, you're getting very close to getting yourself a speeding ticket, so I'll slow down. But that is what the car does best, and even now it's hugging the bends in a very performant way, and yeah, I can't, it's hard to criticise the car in this kind of environment. It is quite rewarding and a good place to be. I think the manual gearbox makes a big difference. I guess many were automatic in the main, only a small fraction in the hundreds were manual gearboxes, the Getrag 290 gearbox. And again, whilst it isn't particularly well known for its performance characteristics, it's quite a long throw, quite heavy. In fact, in many ways, it's like shaking hands with an old friend. It's very slow and deliberate. But again, it doesn't really detract from the performance, especially when you're booting it a bit and hearing that supercharger howl. So what has my ownership experience been with this car so far? Well, I've had the car about 15 or 16 months now, and other than servicing costs, it hasn't cost me anything at all. Touch wood. I've had no issues, no breakdowns. I am touching this burr as we speak, this heavily polished burr as we speak. But no, the car has been great. I've done about 1,500 miles in the car, done some long trips, and the car hasn't missed a beat. It's been great talking point at shows and at pubs, and I've had a really good time driving around in the car. Again, I've done some bits to myself. I've replaced the oil engine, the gearbox oil, the engine oil. I've also replaced the rear seal on the differential, the pinion seal, and the gearbox seal. So little bits of bobs I've done. And the one thing I have done on this car actually that's worth thinking about is if you've got a manual gearbox, the mounts perish, and if you've not been replaced in your manual, or you're going to buy a manual, then that's one thing you do want to check. But it's quite a straightforward job if you've got the appropriate kit at home. But no, the car has been absolutely fine. One thing I did with this car when I first bought it was I took all the wheels off, give it a bit of a wire brush down, treated any superficial surface rust around the subframe, etc. And then I just treated it and then hammerized it and then nanoguarded it just to kind of give that longevity to the car. But it's perfectly solid underneath, and that kind of investment of your time will definitely pay you back in spades, no doubt, in the future. Okay, if you're looking for raw speed and raucous fun, then perhaps this isn't the car for you. This is the kind of car you go with the flow with to a large degree. The Aston Martin DB7 isn't about adrenaline per se, it's more about the occasion, and it does deliver that occasion in spades in very, very many settings, whether that's going for a nice drive to the pub, or to a car show, or hitting Europe, or indeed hitting these lovely B roads. At the start of the video, I compared the DB7 to that eccentric uncle, that impeccably dressed, well-mannered and quirky uncle, albeit a little bit misunderstood. And it's only when you spend time with your uncle do you realise that those characters become very endearing and you very much quite like it. And I think that's what's happening to the DB7 right now. And many people are now cotton on to the fact that all along, it was never trying to be a Ferrari or pretending to be a Porsche. It was simply trying to be an Aston Martin. And I think it does that very well. First of all, it looks absolutely drop dead gorgeous. It gives you a sense of style and occasion, and of course, decent performance. And I think, given the fact that this was the saviour of Aston Martin nearly 30 years ago, this has centre stage in the Aston Martin family tree. Thanks for watching.